In tonight's video, I will be telling 5 stories that take place during the nighttime. Many things can lurk in the dark, as this video will show. A huge thank you to the writers, whose links can be found in the description. Remember, you can send in your own story to rylhstories@gmail.com. If you enjoy the video, feel free to support it with a like and a comment letting me know your thoughts. Subscribing if you're new is also very much appreciated. Enjoy the video. And as always, I hope you all have a great night. I work as a security guard officer downtown in a big city. Most of my job is making sure people aren't camped out in building entryways or in the parking garages that I patrol. Mostly I just drive around and stop if I need to remove someone from the property. But a few of my buildings require me to go inside and clear each floor, stairwell, and the parking garage, if they have one. But most don't. To make sure nobody's snuck inside and set up shop for the night. Inside the buildings I have to patrol, we have little scan tags that we have to scan with our phones, so our company can track that we're actually doing our jobs. But it takes forever to scan them, and most of them are broken anyways. The people I deal with are mostly homeless, but I do get a few out-of-towners just trying to find a place to sleep in their cars for a while before getting back on the road. Regardless of who it is, I try to be polite and give directions to the nearest shelter, non-secure block that is homeless friendly, or a safe place that you can legally park and sleep for the night. Most people are pretty understanding, and will get up and go without needing to be told twice. But some are a little more reluctant, and occasionally violent. The most common line I get after nicely asking someone to vacate the premises is, "You're not a cop," which is always a fun one. But sometimes they switch it up to, "I'll kill you," or "I'm going to wear your skin." It's a boring job, with some excitement thrown in occasionally. But it pays the bills, and it's really not that bad most nights. I do get a little creeped out in a few of my buildings though. 2 in particular. I just can't shake that feeling that I'm being watched. Or like something or someone dangerous is lurking around the corner. Or just on the next floor. It also doesn't help that one of the creepy underground parking garages has 0 cell signal. Which is super great, and not terrifying to think about at all. Monday night, something happened in that parking garage that's got my stomach in knots, and is keeping me up at night. I haven't told anyone, and I don't think anyone close to me would actually believe me if I told them. Since I was a little girl, I loved telling stories, particularly scary stories. I made and still make up stories to scare the crap out of my siblings, friends, fiance, even my parents. Stories about ghosts in the house, strange noises and knocking, and whatever else my overactive imagination conjures up. And I know if I told them, it'd be brushed off. I know it would. My last rounds on Monday at about 3 a.m., I was finishing up my 5th floor tour of one of the creepy old buildings. And like usual, there was nothing incredibly eventful. Just a few lights out and a few doors that should be locked but weren't. I made my way down to the east stairs to the 1st floor of the parking garage, so I could scan the tag and get the hell out of there. The tag on this floor is located outside the P1 East stairway door. So I popped out, scanned the tag with only a little difficulty, and was about to go back through the door to head down to P2, when I heard what sounded like heavy, quick footsteps coming down the ramp. I paused and the noises faded, so I chalked it up to my mind playing tricks on me. Besides, the sliding door you need to open to the garage is closed, and the only way to get it open is to hold the fob near the sensor, and the only people that have those are employees. Not to mention they'd be driving, not walking. I went back through the doors and continued down the steps to my next floor. As I made it to the bottom, I grabbed the handle to the door that would lead me back into the garage, and heard the telltale sound of a door opening above me. I ripped open the door, opting not to scan the tag on this floor, and headed straight for the west stairwell. I find I'm far less concerned with what my boss may think about a missing scan point when I'm possibly about to die. I found myself thinking maybe the homeless man who wanted to wear my skin is about to make good on his weird threat. I made it down to P2 and kept going, There was only one floor between me and my car, and I was dead set on making it to the car before whoever was in here with me could catch up. The sound of the stairwell door opening from below me stopped me in my tracks. That's impossible, I thought. He was just on P1. There's no way he had the time to make it all the way downstairs and make it to the stairwell door on the opposite side of the parking garage before I could even make it to my car. I tore up the stairs. I could hear laughing, like 500 nails on 100 chalkboards, pierced through the air my entire way up to the lobby. I could see shadows below me bouncing off the walls. I yanked my phone out of my pocket, tripping over myself as I exited the stairwell into the lobby. I stared at the screen and willed for the X over the service bars to disappear. They finally did as I made my way out of the front doors. I called 911, my voice shaking as I relayed my story to the operator. When the police showed up, I let them in the building, but refused to enter myself until they'd been through every floor. When the officers met me back on the street after about 20 minutes, they told me whoever it was must be gone now. But whoever was there had managed to get in my patrol car and toss my stuff around. They said it was probably just some kids trying to scare me. I still made one of the officers walk me down to my car before they left. When I got in, I locked my doors and sped to the exit ramp. The sliding door seemed to take an extra long time opening, but I finally made it out. I'm required to wait outside the door in my car until the sliding door shuts all the way, so nobody gets in behind me. So I put the car in park and wait. Just as the door was about a third of the way shut, a man appeared in my rearview mirror, right behind the door. I screamed so loud I could see the windows shake. He was unkempt and dirty, and immediately filled me with a sense of dread. He just stood there smiling a little too wide while the door closed, lowering his head with the door to keep me in his line of sight. Just before the door was closed too far for me to see his face anymore, I saw him give a little wave and mouth the words, "Next time." Have you ever just stared out your window while trying to fall asleep? I did all the time. I have since I was just a little kid. It's not like I'm actually paying attention to anything. Just getting lost in my head while having somewhere to stare with my eyes out of focus is all. It all started 2 months ago. I was staring outside my window thinking of the latest video game I had been playing while trying to fall asleep, when I saw it. An older lady, probably in her mid to late 60s, appeared behind the glass. Her skin was an unhealthy gray color that reminded me of dirty dishwater. She smiled, revealing a revolting grin. Her teeth were nothing more than sharp little black knobs. What would normally be the whites of her eyes were yellow instead, and her pupils were a soulless black. She raised a hand to the glass, her fingernails about 3 inches long and a very dirty, sickly yellow color. Made a screeching sound as she dragged them down the window. At this point, I felt my brain kick into action, and I let out a blood-curdling yell. With a weird hissing sound, I watched as she dropped to the ground. At this point, I had become aware enough to grab my phone and call 911. The cops showed up and didn't do anything. Basically told me to call back if anyone threatens me or breaks in. And then they left, so I took it upon myself to investigate. After grabbing my aluminum baseball bat, I head to right outside my window. Checking out the ground first, I found something so odd I thought I had to be seeing things. It looked like she had slithered away. Ever seen a snake's tracks in dirt? That is what this looked like, but human-sized. I followed the tracks until I hit the tree line, where they suddenly seemed to disappear. I continued to search the woods for a moment, but found nothing else of interest, so I went ahead and returned to the window. Checking out the glass now, I could see where her nails had scraped the window. They had left some weird yellow residue behind. My curiosity getting the better of me, I wiped just a little of the residue onto my finger to smell it. Instantly, I emptied the contents of my stomach onto the ground. Whatever the residue was, it smelled like 1,000 corpses stuck in a dark, damp room, with no ventilation while decaying. The next night, my window having been thoroughly cleaned, I stared at my window with a burning intensity. I was determined to catch this woman and find out why she was bothering me. She didn't disappoint. Since I was posted up in a chair right in front of the window, I saw her approaching this time. She slithered towards my window with no difficulty, as if she were a large human-shaped snake. Once she had arrived just outside my window, she stood up and smiled at me. I was instantly hypnotized by her eyes. Black on yellow sucked me in, and for just a moment I found myself reaching to open the window. At the last second I realized what I was doing and pulled my hand away. Jumping up and grabbing my bat, I start for the window. However, something deep inside me told me this was a mistake. I just knew if I opened that window with her behind it, I was as good as dead. Maybe even worse than dead. I just stared at her, and she stared back at me with a look in her eye that seemed to be daring me to try and attack her. I pick up my phone to call 911, when I stop for just a second and end up calling my best friend instead. The entire time while on the call, she's staring at me grinning with that grotesque, evil smile. Having hung up the phone, my friend letting me know he'll be over in 15 minutes, and I close my eyes counting to 10. When I open them, she's gone. My friend arrives and we survey the area. She didn't touch the window this time, so we started with the ground, and sure enough there were human-sized slither track marks heading to the tree line. And at the tree line she had just seemed to disappear again. My friend took off after hanging around until I had settled down. The next day I went out and bought a fancy security camera system. 10 cameras all with HD video, 30 FPS, night vision, motion censored. Set up all over the outside of my house. 2 at my window, 1 pointed directly on the spot in front of it, and the other set up to record my property all the way up to the tree line. As bedtime approached, I smiled to myself. I was going to catch that thing tonight, and I was sure of it. I stared out my window that night, waiting for her to show up. Around 11 p.m. I was starting to nod off, when there was a loud booming knock on my door. I jerk awake and grab my bat. I turn to my laptop to check the door cam. A cop is standing outside. Letting out a sigh, I leave my bat on my bed and head to answer the door. I haven't laid eyes on the officer for more than a moment when a feeling of dread filled me. "Hello, sir." The cop begins. "I'm just here to follow up on a call we received from you the other night. Mind if I come in and have a look around and make sure you're safe?" I look him up and down, and then my stomach feels like it was replaced with a black hole. The whites of his eyes are yellow, his pupils black, and his nails are long and yellow. I stand there for a second trying to think what to do, when he speaks up again. "Sir, I'd just like to come in and make sure you're safe." As I stare at him in horror, I notice his features seem to blur, like watching a streaming video at 144p. It's almost as if he'd become pixelated for a moment. As he seemed to shift back into a solid, non-blurred form, I noticed his eyes seemed normal now, yellow to white and black to brown. I almost thought I had just imagined it all for a second, when I noticed his nails were still yellow and long. I slammed the door in his face, locked it, and ran to my room to grab my bat, turning to my laptop to see the front door cam was off. Checking the rest one by one, I see none are working. Then my laptop emitted a loud, high-pitched winding noise, and smoke came out of the exhaust fan. The smell of the smoke made me empty my stomach. It smelled like the putrid residue on the window. At this point I knew the HDD was fried, which is where I had all my video footage recording to. The next day I packed up and moved out. Been staying with my friend since. I haven't seen whatever it is since, and I hope I never do. I don't stare out the window at night anymore, and I haven't slept very well as it has invaded my every dream. Sometimes at night I swear I get a whiff of that horrible, rotting smell. If you have been living under a rock for the past few years, let me explain what the Midnight Game is. The Midnight Game is an old pagan ritual that they still do to this day. It's meant for the people who disobey the gods in their religion. The way to punish them is to play the Midnight Game. The way you start the game is to put a drop of blood on a paper signed with your name. After that, you will need a candle, and light it before midnight, and you need to turn off any lights in your house besides the candle you plan on using as your only light source. Then you knock on a wooden door 22 times, and the 22nd knock has to end exactly at midnight. Then you open the door and blow out your candle, close it, then open it again, and relight it. Then the game begins. Now what makes this scary is that you are letting in the Midnight Man. He is some sort of entity of some sort, and is quite terrifying to be honest. There are ways to know he's nearby: a sudden drop of temperature, a shadowy figure, or your candle blowing out. If your candle goes out at any time, you have to relight it within 10 seconds. If not, then you lose the game. Now if you do lose the game either by your candle or the Midnight Man catching you, then he will proceed to rip out your organs one by one, pretty much killing you. Now the game ends at 3:33 AM, and you can't end the game. If you do by turning on a light, even for a second, then the game stops, and the Midnight Man doesn't leave. There is a sort of saying to end it though, and the only way to stay safe from the Midnight Man, and it's to surround yourself with salt. That way he can't get you, but you can't leave until the game is over. Now, on to my story. So I like the supernatural and I tried the Midnight game. It was only me when I played it, and no one was in my house when I played it. I did everything that I just said, and began the game. It started at my front door, and I decided that I would make things a little interesting, and leave the salt in my room, which is the farthest room away from the front door. I started walking towards it, and the entire time I felt uneasy. I got to my room, and I felt on edge. But nonetheless, I got to the salt. I had a false sense of security when I had though, because I knew I had something that would keep me safe, but it's just salt. Another rule of the game is to not stop moving, because if you stay in one spot for too long, then you will be caught by the Midnight Man. So I kept on moving around the house. First I went to the bathroom, and looked in the mirror for no reason. Then I went downstairs, but while I was on my landing I heard something in my living room. I looked in there, which is in clear view of my stairs, and I swear I saw a shadow of someone outside. I ran down the stairs and ran to the window, but when I got there, there was no one there. I then went to my kitchen and looked around. My house is pretty small, but is quite warm all the time. So when I walked into my kitchen, it felt cold. Remember, that means the Midnight Man is near you. So a few of these events happened, and eventually I did something very stupid. I turned on the lights. It wasn't like I manually did it. It was like my body automatically did it out of fear. It was around 2:30 when I ended the game, so I had about an hour left, but it was still ended permanently. But even after the game is ended, he won't leave. I knew this, and I still had some encounters with the Midnight Man even after the game, and so I did the game again. Similar things happened during it, but this time I didn't turn on any lights. I beat the Midnight Man, but not without consequences. During the game, my candle went out for 11 seconds. On the 11th second, I felt a sharp pain in my lower abdomen. I paid no attention to it until after the game. I was about to take a shower, and I took off my shirt, and saw a deep cut where I think my kidney would be. It was on the front of my body, so it was easy to see, yet it didn't hurt. I then realized something. Who was that at the window? The Midnight Man is supposed to be inside your house. I took a nap after the game, but nothing happened. But I remember that I left the door unlocked. That is why I don't like the Midnight game, and why I don't play it anymore. It proves something to me, and that something is out there to do something bad, to all of us. That is why I tell you, don't play the Midnight game. This happened years and years ago. In fact, 7 years to the day. I lived in a sleepy little town in Massachusetts, right on a cul-de-sac that had a little path that led down to a pond. It was a picturesque town, the perfect place to raise kids. Then there was the woods. All the kids in the neighborhood were used to wandering around the woods at the other end of the neighborhood. It was pretty much tradition. Whenever a new kid moved to the neighborhood, a bunch of us would show them all the best spots to climb trees and play. Then there were the woods across the street from me. Even during the day, this stretch of woods was silent. No birds, no squirrels, nothing. If you went about a mile down, all of a sudden all the life seemed to come back, but nothing in that spot. My dog would go out of her way to avoid it, even refusing to cross the street, and growling whenever I did. The kids came up with tons of urban legends explaining this. I remember a story about a zombie man that ate anything that came into the area. The reality of it was far worse. April 23rd, 2012 came around. A group of my friends had decided to spend the night at my house. Then we were all going to spend the next day at the pond down the road. We were having the time of our 13-year-old lives, playing video games and telling scary stories. It was about 10:30 when we decided on truth or dare. Everyone was picking truth when we first started. Then about halfway through, people started getting braver. Mostly because we agreed on not giving any dares that could make us sick, like licking doorknobs or toilets. Essentially, no putting our mouths anywhere disgusting. We had people texting their crushes and flashing the neighbors, who were long asleep. Then it was my turn. Not wanting to look like a wimp, I picked dare. Okay, go explore the woods for a half hour. I felt my heart stop. As soon as the words were out, my other friends were trying to make her change her dare. But I said no. I couldn't look like a wimp in front of all my friends. I was horrified, sure, but my 13-year-old brain figured nothing was worse than being embarrassed in front of my friends. So I agreed. I remember standing in front of the woods so vividly. My legs felt like lead, my flashlight was shaking in my hands, and my phone was non-stop vibrating with messages from my friends, who were watching me from the safety of my room, telling me to go for it. Eventually I did. The moment I had taken one step into that dense tree line, I wanted to turn back, but the timer was on. 30 minutes. Just 30 minutes. I started wandering around. It was creepy, sure, but also strangely beautiful. There were so many trees, perfect for climbing up. I could already picture myself sitting in one reading a book. I was almost enjoying myself. 20 minutes. Before I knew it, I had climbed one of the trees and was just sitting and relaxing. It was nice. I couldn't wait to tell my friends how scared we were for nothing. 15 minutes. It was at that point that I heard some rustling nearby, getting closer to me. Cool, I thought. Maybe I'll see a coyote or something. I turn off my flashlight. Now the moon is illuminating the forest. It's still really pretty to see. 10 minutes. Then I saw it. It was tall, easily 7 feet. It was walking on 2 legs and growling. It almost looked like a person. No living human being could even look like that. It was skeletal, with sunken-in black eyes that didn't once blink in the time I looked at it. Its mouth was large with rows of pointed teeth, and pale white skin stretched tightly over bones that seemingly jutted out from every angle. It looked like it was covered in blood. It took everything in me for me to not cry out. Instead, I pulled my legs up into the tree and watched it get closer and closer to me before it stopped directly under the tree I was in. My breath hitched, and I retreated as far back as I could, holding my hand over my mouth and doing anything to not scream. It stood there beneath me for what felt like an eternity, not moving, just breathing heavily. Then eventually it growled and scurried off into the tree line. I let out a breath I didn't even know I was holding, and slowly lowered myself from the tree, and that's when it happened. As soon as my feet touched the ground, the alarm on my phone signaling the end of the 30 minutes went off, and loudly. I rushed to turn it off and froze, praying it hadn't heard it, until I heard an ear-piercing screech in the direction it had run off to, then rustling coming directly at me. Fast. I didn't even think, just ran in the direction I had come from, not even bothering to look behind me. But I knew it was right there. I could hear it gaining on me, feel its breath on my neck. It had to have been running on all fours by the pattern in its footsteps. Not that I really had time to care about that. I saw the lights to my house through the trees, and put all the energy I had into that final dash, where I broke through. It was at that moment that my foot got caught on something, a root probably, and I face-planted. I finally gathered the courage to scream and rolled over. That's when I saw it up close, standing on 2 legs about 2 feet away. It had stopped directly at the tree line. almost as though it couldn't go farther. It growled at me, then turned and dashed back into the woods. At that point, I ran back inside and told my friends everything. Of course, they didn't believe me. They thought I was just trying to scare them. I moved 2 years later, but for those 2 years, every time I passed by those woods, I could feel eyes on me. I knew it was biding its time, waiting until I was dumb enough to get too close to the woods again. I would feel it watching my house sometimes, and as our moving van pulled away, I swear I saw it watching us go. I'd hate to know what would have happened if it got me. There was something off today. I'd been hiking for 3 days so far, and I'd always felt completely comfortable here. There was something about this forest that always relaxed me. No matter how crazy life at home got, I always felt better after a few days of hiking, not having to deal with people and all their drama. The forest might be dangerous sometimes, but it was predictably dangerous. If I ran into a bear, I knew the protocol, and I had spray to protect me. Despite that risk, I always feel safe and happy here. This place feels good somehow. Safe and relaxing. An antidote for whatever issues civilization throws at me. But today was different. I couldn't put my finger on it, but something feels wrong. I don't want to turn my back to anything. Occasionally I would get this creepy feeling that there were eyes on me. But of course when I turned around, nothing was there. The atmosphere was strange too. I shoved the feeling down and moved on. I didn't have long before nightfall, and I needed to get to the next campsite. This part of forest was significantly denser than usual, with long fingers of moss hanging from the trees and occasional blackberry vines spilling across the trail. It smelled different too. It just smelled older than what I was used to. I was just noticing that the sun was going to go down when something rustled nearby. I jumped, almost tripping on yet another vine, and glanced everywhere. Nothing. And then I heard something. It was like scraping metal, or that awful noise when someone scrapes a knife against a porcelain plate. It was not a noise you should ever hear in the forest. It lasted for about half a second, but stayed in my ringing ears for much longer. I stood completely still for about a minute, barely even breathing. I waited to hear the noise again, but everything was silent. I only turned around when I felt the prickle of eyes on the back of my neck. But when I finally turned, there was nothing. I stopped a minute to catch my breath and continued walking. I normally came here to soothe jangled nerves, but this was doing the exact opposite. At this point, my only thought was to get out of here, back to somewhere with a door and a very good lock. But I was still miles away from any bit of civilization. It was almost dark by the time I heard the noise again. It sounded closer this time. I shined my too-weak flashlight all around me, but all I saw were layers and layers of leaves and moss. As I continued walking, almost tripping in my haste, I couldn't shake the constant feeling of being watched. By now I was a nervous wreck. I was constantly jumping, seeing movement in the corner of my eye. It was usually just moss blowing in the breeze, but I swear there was something moving in the very corner of my vision, always trying to stay out of my line of sight. But I was paranoid. The last rational part of my brain told me that I had to get out of here, get to the next campsite, and everything would be fine. I was in such a hurry that it took me a while to notice something else. Even at night, there should have been plenty of noise from birds, insects, animals, and everything else that lived here. But now it was completely silent. I couldn't even hear the leaves and moss rustling in the wind. There was an oppressive, foreign, and somehow malevolent silence in the air. All I could hear was my thumping heart and labored breathing. And then there was that sound again, this time from directly behind me. Not wanting to believe my ears, I slowly turned around. About 15 feet away from me, there was a pair of glowing, yellow eyes. They were too far above the ground to belong to any animal. Above them I could see the outline of a huge pair of antlers, half hidden by the darkness. I heard quick, heavy footsteps as they rapidly grew closer, and a pair of impossibly long arms came into view, tipped with jagged claws. I stumbled backwards, in a futile effort to get away from whatever this thing was. But it was far too late. The last thing I felt was hot, foul breath on my face, before everything went black. Subscribe to Bad Vibe Storytelling.